Right about now, you are listening to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, a show where we discuss living as a leader worth following, leading others to do the same, and in doing so, leaving a legacy for future generations. My name is Jimmy Gonzalez Jr., a learning and development professional and leadership coach, sitting down with my co-host, Anthony Devon Watts Jr., an expert contact center leader that has effectively led and developed dynamic teams with high motivation. Together, we have over 30 years experience in the corporate game. Join us as we discuss our growth as leaders, share the lessons we've learned, and interview others to see how their leadership style was shaped as they were mentored by adversity. Legacy leaders, welcome back to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast. Remember, this is a show where we teach you how to live as a leader worth following, how to develop others to do the same, and in doing so, lead a legacy for generations to come. We definitely want to welcome you back to part 2 of our first, really technically our second installment, but the first guest that we have for our MBA series, Mentored by Adversity, in season 2, which is More Than a Pod. Back with us, we have Shannon Martin, and we definitely want to take an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into her background, specifically what she does for Podbean, and really start to drill down a little bit more in regards to using podcasting within your organization and really continuing to open up your learning and development strategies with this different type of vehicle as well. Remember, for our listeners, whether you're new or you're a loyal listener, we definitely love for you to review the podcast, give us a like. We have definitely been able to increase our followers on Podbean over the last couple of weeks with some of the exposure that we've gotten, so we're super grateful for that. If you're one of our vidcasters and you love watching on the YouTube channel, definitely, again, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as already, and always, whether you're listening to the podcast or watching the video format, we'd love for you to share. Share this episode with somebody who you think will definitely get a lot of value, especially if you know that they're in working for an organization, if they're in the learning and development field, and really are looking to use podcasting, again, to really change the way they help their employees and their teams learn a little bit more and be able to cascade messages in a slightly different way, and maybe even a more effective way. So we're going to learn more about that again as we continue to move forward with our conversation. So again, welcome, Shannon. We appreciate having you with us. Please introduce yourself and just remind us about specifically what you do for Podbean, and kind of how we were able to start this relationship as well.
Yeah, I'm Shannon Martin, and I'm the Director of Communications at Podbean. We're a small team, so what that means in terms of my role is I do a little bit of everything. And I love that feeling. So it's been really enjoyable doing a lot of being a liaison with the podcasting community, the general podcasting community, and then in the last few years, we've really become a specialist sort of by what we normally try to do, which is listening to our customers and what they asked for, what they needed, and listening to what's going on in the community, and just hearing the needs. And then we have a great tech team, so if we hear about something related to what we do, we can often develop a solution. So we developed probably the first truly internal communications and training and development, internal private podcasting platform and solution. I think we were really kind of the leaders in that space. And so we have worked with lots of different companies in doing that. And so I'm spending a good amount of time on that piece of it, and it's really enjoyable because I'm in the communications world and I'm loving learning more about the learning space and the needs and that kind of stuff. So I do that, and then still some of our more broad communications conferences, things like that with podcasters.
And ironically, we connected on LinkedIn. Yep. And you were actually started messaging me about our podcast itself. And well, actually, no, it was a reverse of that, about using Podbean and using podcasting for kind of corporate purposes, and again, using it within that learning and development space. And within that conversation, realizing we actually had a podcast already with Podbean, and we were able to connect from that perspective. And then again, really, really grateful and blessed to be able to have been highlighted a couple of weeks ago within the Podbean platform as the site or podcast of the week, which again, we're super grateful. So many, more followers and listeners from around the world, which has just been amazing to Devon and myself as we continue to grow this audience. And it's a powerful thing to be able to have an opportunity and a platform to be able to share your message again with people all across the world. And Podbeam has been a wonderful podcasting platform for us to be able to get that message out in a very simple way, very user-friendly way, very effective way for us, and definitely has really helped us over the last 8 months, on our podcasting journey as we started kind of as infants and probably in toddler stages now, but still growing and learning every day and every week as we continue to move forward. So again, appreciate that very, very much.
Yeah, it's great and it's funny. Yeah, I run into people. I've been talking with a lot of people in L&D and stuff, about the corporate podcasting, and then I'm so excited. I run into a lot of people. They're like, I have my own podcast, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. Tell me about it. And then a lot of people that are podcast fans, and to me, then it goes to speak to the fact of why this is such a perfect thing for corporations to be using, because if you have that kind of enthusiasm from people doing it or listening, it's sort of a sign that maybe there's something there to consider.
No, absolutely. So that's a kind of a great segue too. Let's start to dive into that a little bit more. I guess, what are some of the kind of the first steps, and how do you as a team and as an organization help a corporate entity? I work for an engineering company right now. We have 4 regions on the East Coast, about 30 plus offices across, again, the east side of the country. And that it is something that we're looking into. So, how would we be able to really start that process of using podcasts, and what do you see are some of the benefits, again, for using podcasting within that learning and development space within your organization?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you said about your podcast holds true from the perspective of getting started and ease of use and that kind of thing. So we provide the technology, the platform, and the piece about it that's important for companies using it is that we provide a secure platform. It's not the same as our other platform because we're not distributing it out to iTunes or Apple Podcasts, I should say, Google and all of those. We're actually wanting it to be only for the employees that are supposed to be accessing it in most cases. Some companies are doing both. They're doing a marketing and stories that go out to the world, and then they're doing, but usually the learning and development stuff is private. So we have the technology for that, and then we're providing a lot of educational resources now to help people with how to get started, connecting them also with resources like if they haven't done a podcast before about kind of how to go about it. But I think, it can be used in so many different ways, and we're seeing kind of a wide array of uses, but a lot of the reasons people came to us initially, it was often, as you're talking about, many offices, people, it was often distributed teams, sales teams that were out on the road, and they were saying, sending more emails is not helpful. This is it's a struggle for these employees. Like, think about sales. They really need to be focused on selling and be out there on the road. And we're telling them you have all this stuff to read, and you have to attend this thing and do this. And of course, some of that is important to our own development. But they knew there were some more efficient ways to provide some of that. And so that's kind of where a lot of the organizations started. Now it's very different because a lot more people are working from home. So that actually provides maybe a different use case in really keeping people connected. There's something about the intimacy of audio. There's also a lot of research that shows that written, and I'm a writer, so I don't want to downplay the importance of reading and writing, but we don't tend to decode a lot of that information. It's something like, it's kind of bad. It's like 7% when we read something. And audiovisual takes it up to like almost 40%, they say. Of course, it is based on how well something's written, how well something is done audiovisually, but it's definitely easier for our brains to take in the information. And I particularly listen to a lot of podcasts, and I think that sometimes the audio only ones too, when that's appropriate, can be particularly impactful because there's something about just that again, that listening factor. That really makes a difference. So a lot of companies are using it for the sake of it being either maybe the only way or the only really good way they can get across information. One of our clients, VMware, we have an interview with them that we did online, and that's why they started, because they had the sales teams. And they could use their LMS for certain things, but it didn't have a very good offline playback experience, and these folks were traveling all the time. And so that's kind of why they thought about starting. And then it's become so popular that they started different channels, for all different kinds of uses over time. So it sort of evolved from convenience to the efficiency and effectiveness of it. And I think there's something unique about the storytelling piece. That people can hear stories of leadership, of employee wins, of overcoming adversity. I think, as I was thinking of that when listening to some of your past episodes, those are the kind of things, and often it's either its own kind of piece, or it really ties in with different L&D pieces that you're doing. It might be kind of in the micro learning arena, where it really reinforces, some other bigger learning, program or some training, or it's something people listen to beforehand to sort of be prepared and in the mindset. It's something that, they have just in time so that they can go back to it, because we know, you can only absorb so much. So you do an online training, and maybe you do a quiz, and, you've sort of mastered the knowledge, but then when you're applying it a month later, you have to go back and look at stuff, and having those podcasts is really great. Recently, I've been hearing about quite a few people doing, because you mentioned some of your background, and I was thinking, I talked about sales, but another one that I think we're going to start seeing more of is customer support teams using podcasts, because especially those folks that are on the phone doing customer support all the time, what better way than to hear role plays of, good examples of interactions, that they can actually model and hear, and that's not a one-time thing, because you hear it, but you take in a certain amount, then you run into a troublesome customer, and they a lot of times they have scripts and stuff, but again, when you hear it, you really absorb it, and you say, oh, the way that person, kind of the tone they used, I see how that might make all the difference, and the script maybe can't give you that. So I think that's one I'm really curious to see if more people are going to. I keep throwing that out there, to see if more people will start doing that.
No, that's exciting. I definitely I want to touch upon that. From a sales perspective, Devon and myself have had conversations, again, especially about our old employer, how we can use it in that setting. Even with my current company, for engineers and running projects, they're in the field, 9 times out of 10, and as a billable company, we have to make sure that they are working on projects, working with our clients, and working on infrastructure and things that we're doing to help build cities and projects and things of that nature. So it is very hard to take people away from their day-to-day job and say, hey, we're going to have you in this training or this learning session for 4 hours or 8 hours in a day. So to your point, to be able to take advantage of what we call that window time, whether you're in sales or, again, you're just in a field position, how do we really use that time most effectively to be able to provide you information and learning? And I think there's definitely something to be said, right? We of course tout the fact that we also have the vidcast portion of what we do, so to provide that visual component. But there is something to be said about the audio itself, and how the mind and just the creativeness of your brain starts to create those pictures yourself in your mind. So when you talked about using it for kind of role playing and customer service examples, I could definitely see that, where you kind of outline this story that you're telling through this podcast format, but within the story, really the purpose is to help the listener, the customer service rep, how do you resolve objections? How do you, handle irate customers and use the right verbiage in the right way and ask the right questions at the right time, when typically they're not face-to-face. All they have, the biggest tool they have, is their voice. So just to be able to listen to that type of learning in those examples, and again, be able to paint that picture in their own mind, I think that's a phenomenal, additional use case for podcasting within a corporate setting. Absolutely. We are primarily a leadership podcast, and that's what we focus on. So I am curious, from your experience, how have you seen companies and organizations using podcasting for leadership development? I think you also mentioned leaders utilizing the tool to be able to cascade messages. So any examples or use cases that you've seen, some really effective ways that companies have used it for those purposes?
Yeah, we have a lot of leaders doing podcasts. It seems like most organizations, if they take on the idea of podcasting, it may start with sort of a specific learning objective or something, but it always comes around to there being C-suite leaders doing podcasts too, because they're like, oh, that's a great way for me to share with with our employees, and in your voice, and that does make a difference. I think it really humanizes the messaging. So we're seeing everything from like a CEO fireside chat type of thing, where the CEO does something on a regular basis. Some people do a hosted show or an interview kind of thing, but with maybe different members of leadership, but they have a sort of a steady host so that it kind of gives that person, gives that back and forth conversation versus kind of a one-way thing. And another one that has been pretty cool is that we've seen people doing sort of, I want to say, like almost like a TED Talk type of situation. And that's been a couple different things. One was an organization that we worked with sort of early on. They actually would bring in experts from all around the world, and they used to have sort of two people up on stage having a chat, or one person doing a talk, and they would have an audience there, pre-viral days, and they would do that, but then they realized they wanted to record them and have them available for everybody, because that they had people all over the world. So they started doing that and realized, it's really convenient if we can get it out as podcast and have it available anytime and on demand. And then we've seen other organizations use that in a similar way. And more interestingly, sometimes is using internal subject matter experts. So having them do it, and many, they can do it as a talk, and that happens sometimes. But then a lot of people are also doing it in an interview type format, because that's sometimes a little more comfortable for the the employee, the subject matter expert, to kind of bounce it off with questions and things. Leadership development, all kinds of different situations. I think, again, the power of storytelling really helps when it comes to thinking about tackling tough situations. I was talking to someone recently, and they were saying that they thought what some of their plans were. They have a couple different podcasts that they want to do for their organization, but one that they really want to do is when people move into different levels, like moving into be a sales manager from being a salesperson, that they have this, a lot of times they're good at sales, and now they're a sales manager, and they don't really get a lot as far as managing people and all the potential problems and things they're going to run into. And so they were like, this is going to be really great to be able to use some of our other managers to talk about some of those things that they've dealt with, to do some micro learning pieces, on just some of the real specific kind of topics we want to be able to impart upon them, because they were saying, it's not usually the kind of thing where, they move up and then they're kind of thrown in a lot of times. And without that kind of training on those bits that we sometimes forget you still need learning on. Just because you know a product or you know how to sell or whatever does not mean that you have those other kind of leadership skills that are really important. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting and different uses of it, and kind of as we see more podcast fans becoming, responsible for doing podcasts within their organization, they're bringing a lot of what they see from the podcasting world in general. Like someone might listen to your podcast and say, oh, wow, the way that they're doing things with leadership, I'm listening to this, it's a public podcast, I enjoy it, but, there's some pieces of that we might want to implement, with something internal. Or you have a favorite, like I use TED Talks as an example, but you have a favorite podcast that you listen to all the time, and we can do something like that within our organization too, and kind of borrow those things that make it attractive.
Yeah, that was, we've actually, and I see it as a huge compliment. We've had some of our listeners that have taken some of our episodes and use that for kind of training and development of their team and say, hey guys, we want you to listen and watch this podcast, and then we're going to talk and do some activities about what you've learned and how do we implement some of those strategies that they're providing you. So again, it's really cool when you see your content and your information and your podcast being used in that type of format. But to your point, it just continues to emphasize, the point of how effective, this can really be for those type of settings. So we do have Devon that has joined us, and Devon had a couple of questions as well. So it's actually perfect timing because I was going to kind of segue into some of those questions. So one of the things that we wanted to ask Shannon is, we're curious about how, right, obviously the emergence of podcasts in the last 3 to 5 years has continued to grow, especially from a podcasting community as more celebrities and podcasts have just kind of blown up. But how has that impacted how people look to learn from your perspective, and again, more from a results and benefit perspective that you've been able to see companies get and receive because of the use of podcasting for learning and development purposes?
Yeah, it's huge. Podcasting last year especially was just, we had 100,000 new podcasts start on Podbean alone. Yeah, a lot of those don't end up going to Apple. And so if you see, the Apple numbers are a little over 1 million or whatever. Mm-hmm. But 100,000 last year, new podcasts. So it's crazy. But yeah, exactly. And there's still, I think, room for a lot of good content out there, Mm-hmm. I think there's still a lot of possibilities. But I think that translates over in a couple ways. One is that organizations are people have become very familiar with it. So organizations, people on the L&D team start to think, that's a format I know. How could I use it? Many times I talked to one group a while ago, and the reason they were looking to do it is they had done some surveys of employees about, hey, what if we offered this, or this? What's the best format for you? And podcasts resoundingly were something that the employees wanted. That's because they're familiar with it. It's attractive to them, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So when we work with our platform, we have this Podbean Pro app that most of our organizations use, or some use a white label app, and we're experts at a podcasting app, so it works really well because it is what they know. So someone gets it and they immediately know how to use it. It's not like, oh, this whole new system I need to learn how to maneuver and stuff. So it's very convenient for the employee and doing that. And so I think the popularity is leading to that desire on both the side of the people producing and the listener side, and then people can get really creative with it. And also, again, just listening to podcasts in general, thinking of how you like to learn things personally, and what kind of formats you like and questions people ask, and putting a lot of that into it. One of the companies that you listened to the interview with, Slalom, that we work with, they listen to a lot of podcasts, and they always had fun, a fun and common interview question that they asked every time, and they really liked that element, so they started doing that on theirs, and now it's sort of a water cooler topic, amongst employees, because everybody wants to have their answer prepared for this cool, fun, question that they ask. So I love that. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And then Devon, I think you had an additional question regarding kind of results and tracking of the use of the podcast from an internal perspective.
Yeah, 1,000%. First, I wasn't aware that there was even a white label option for some of these companies that are looking to leverage this as a way to teach. So I thought that was really impressive to find out. I'm pretty sure that's going to be exciting for our listeners who are exploring podcasts as a vehicle for teaching, to know that they can have something that is branded, for their organization, right? But going to the kind of the data side of it, right? For companies that are entertaining or exploring leveraging podcasts as their LMS, their primary form of learning, right? how has the industry solved for kind of the results tracking component of it, where we can get down to the individual learner and understand like consumption? Is that still evolving? Has that already been solved for?
Podbean solved it. I don't know about others. I think because we, as I was talking to Jimmy earlier and saying, we kind of got into this sort of by default because customers asked us initially, but because of that, we were really fortunate that our customers kind of pushed us into it, and then we learned as we went what we needed to do. So our corporate customers that do internal podcasting get the normal podcast stats, of course, also, but we have something called user engagement intelligence, which they get for private podcasts. And that's user level data, and it's also second by second consumption. So they can look at an episode and just say, okay, well, this, we thought 30 minutes was going to be a good time frame for this interview, but we have a couple interviews done, and everybody's dropping off at 20 minutes. So either the time is too long, or we're really boring the last 10 minutes, or, they can learn what they need to adjust. Do they need to do a couple shorter episodes, and then they can also see the actual, what the actual employee is doing. So one of our customers, VMware, that we started working with kind of early on, they were taking that data, and then we did an integration with them with their LMS, so it dumps the data so that they don't even, it kind of saves them a step. It's all downloadable, and you can manipulate it in different ways, but we just did an integration, using APIs and stuff, so that it dumps right in there, because they do about 60%. I can't remember which is 60 and which is 40, but anyway, let's say half and half. Half is sort of internal communications, good to know, knowledge, growth, leadership growth, and then the other half-ish is required training. So they obviously need to really track that very specifically. So those are the ones that they actually track, and then they credit the employees for completing those episodes. So it shows both, even if it's not required stuff, and you just want to look at that consumption data to get an idea of what's working and what isn't. That's really helpful. And then, of course, on the individual level. So, yeah, because normal podcast stats, it's a good question. You can ask it because you're a podcaster. So I think the normal podcast stats wouldn't really suffice for what you need to know when it's internal, typically. So that's why we've developed that piece.
Awesome. I really appreciate you just kind of breaking that down. It definitely sounds like you've gotten to the grain of data that somebody running training would want to understand or need to understand in order to know if it's being effective or not. I'm curious, just kind of as a follow-up from that, are you guys seeing any specific industries that are really gravitating towards like this new method of delivering content and communications? Like, is it prevalent in spaces where you have like remote sales force, or is it really the tech areas that are gravitating and moving in this direction right now? I'm just curious about that.
It's surprisingly diverse, and actually not the things that I would think, because what you mentioned are some of the things that I would definitely a lot of sales, remote workforces. Certainly that was kind of our initial case, but lately it's been a lot of banking. It's been a lot of pharmaceutical. I've had some organization. I've had a couple of sort of government related organizations and even membership organizations. So they were like, different. We just had one recently from a big nonprofit that's kind of tied. It's like an NGO, I should say, and they're going to be doing a bunch of stuff with teaching people around the world. So pretty diverse in terms of the types of things that we're seeing, the types of situations and stuff. So, and we do have audio and video podcasting. So we have some people doing, more visual pieces. But my pointer that I always tell people is I love podcasting, but I'm also not trying to sell it as the solution for everything. Some things are going to require, it's not going to replace every written piece of something. You're going to have to look at a guide for certain things. Of course, you're going to have to see a video, but there are certain things that audio works well for, and the delivery method of being able to have it kind of on demand, works really well. But it's not going to be. I don't expect podcasting to be the only L&D thing a few years from now, but I expect that most companies will think that they need it as part of something that they're doing with employees, whether it's more communications based or more training based or a blend. I really think that there will be more of that because, yeah, we're seeing really diverse, and I'm surprised it's not mainly tech companies. Maybe a lot of them were doing it for a while in a different kind of sense, a different format. Maybe they were kind of ahead, and maybe that's why I'm not seeing as much of a new influx. Because certainly we have some tech and consulting firms have also been a big, because they're also out and about, and people that are busy professionals that need a lot of influx of up-to-date knowledge. I think that's why we're seeing stuff like pharmaceutical, and but I guess that would be true with banking and financial services too, because there's so many things that are rapidly changing. And so that's always a good use. But I just talked to someone this week, and they have sort of warehouse folks. That's their main use that they want it for, because they actually don't have company email addresses. And they were saying, it's problematic to deliver a lot of things that information we want to deliver to them. And with our service, they can just input, you can use a personal address and be private members so that it's all kept secure, but allows them to just use the app, and they don't have to be behind a computer and logging onto a company system. So there's probably a lot more out there that have that use too. So, yeah.
Thank you for the insights.
Did you have any other additional questions, Stefan?
No, those are my two, and then we ended up talking about just kind of how the industry is changing, so I really appreciate that. But yeah, I don't have anything else.
I am curious, Shannon, one thing that I was interested in asking about, you had mentioned companies also using podcasting for onboarding purposes. Mm-hmm. How specifically have you seen them using it for that type of setup and process?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different things going on. And the one that recently came to mind that I think I shared with you earlier is that one of the companies that we deal with that puts out a lot of podcasts, they package together some of their key episodes that they think have maybe the top learning things and some things that are real strong on company culture. And they provide that so the way our system works, there's groups and there's folders. There's some different ways to organize content. So they provide that sort of in an organized fashion so that the employees don't have to. They can, of course, listen to everything down the road, but it gives them something. And they actually listen so that sort of day one when they come into their job role, they know a lot more about the company than what they could just read on the website, and then they have a real feel for things, and they've said they've seen a huge impact in how those folks are sort of integrated into the company and really can kind of speak the message of the company before they've really been in. So that's I think a really good use case, and then others are using it combined with whatever sort of program they have initially to sort of really reinforce some of the things, or to have people listen to some things before they come in for a day of training, onboarding, reading things, that kind of stuff.
No, that's great. I was actually just thinking about that. We've attempted to do processes like that where, before orientation, we would send them an email to welcome them to the team. But that would be great if they get a link or we give them access, right, to the platform where they can now listen to a message, or maybe even a couple of, very quick series of messages that helps them to get them excited and helps with that onboarding process before orientation, after orientation, and continuously along that onboarding process and new hire training, whatever that may look like for that organization. So thank you. Yeah, definitely very, very interesting. So again, we appreciate you, spending time with us and giving us this opportunity to ask some more questions specifically about podcasting within a corporate environment and as a learning and development tool. Like you said, I don't think it's the end all to be all, but I definitely see a huge impact in adding this to your ability to really continue to create this virtual learning environment that I've been after and looking to create in the past, and even with my current company now. So again, thank you very much, Shannon Miller, Director for Podbean, and specifically working with communications, and also not just at Podbean, but Easy Listening as well, or Easy Living, I should say, excuse me. Yeah. So we thank you for your time and for being with us. For our legacy leaders out there, especially those, again, who are working in a corporate environment, or you have a small business of your own and you're looking for ways to help your employees learn more about your company culture, providing some type of onboarding process, and we even talked about role playing and finding different creative ways to be able to help your employees and your team not just learn information and be able to obtain that knowledge, but also even help skill development along the way. So again, thank you for your time so much. For our legacy leaders out there, again, like this episode, make sure that you leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you if you're out there and you've thought about it. What are some different ways that maybe we didn't mention that you can see, again, as another use case for using podcasting within your environment to help with that learning and skill development process. So make sure you like and review the podcast itself. Again, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and continue to share this episode, and definitely share the podcast itself with other leaders, L&D folks that are out there in that space that you know would get a lot of value from this episode specifically. We'd love for you to share it, and again, leave us some comments and continue to interact with us and get into the conversation. We'll be talking more about this as well in our community, so if you haven't joined us yet, please go over to Facebook as well and join the Legacy Leader community, where we'll continue to have more conversations about how we can use technology to help you as a small business, as an entrepreneur, continue to build out your team and provide that learning and skill development along the way. So as always, we thank you guys for continuing to listen and being a part of this conversation. Again, thank you, Shannon, so much for joining us. Very informative. We appreciate it very much. And to our legacy leaders out there, as always, God bless, stay encouraged, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Rage on that beat, going crazy.
You have just listened to the Legacy and Leadership Podcast, hosted by Jimmy Gonzalez and Devon Watts. Thank you, and we hope that you live, lead, and leave a legacy worth remembering. Until next time.